In the small, quiet town of Malomo, nestled in the heart of Africa, there lived a family that everyone knew but few dared to speak about. This family was feared, not because they were cruel or mean, but because of the strange events that seemed to follow them wherever they went. At the center of this fear were two children, twins named Kemi and Kola. From the day they were born, whispers filled the town. People said the twins were different, that they brought bad luck, and that nothing good ever happened around them. It all began on a stormy night when Kemi and Kola came into the world. The rain had pounded the earth for hours, and the wind howled through the trees like a wild beast. The midwife, a wise old woman named Mama Rissi, arrived at the family's small house just as the sky was lit up with a blinding flash of lightning. She was the first to notice something unusual. The first twin, Kemi, was born with her eyes wide open. She didn't cry like most newborns. Instead, she stared directly at Mama Rissi with a gaze that made the old woman shiver. The second twin, Kola, was silent too, but as soon as he was born, the storm outside suddenly stopped. The air was heavy with tension, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. Mama Rissi quickly wrapped the babies in warm cloth and handed them to their mother, Adani, who was exhausted but relieved. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. Animals that came too close to the house would run away in fear. The family's crops, once lush and green, began to wither and die. The other children in the town refused to play with the twins, claiming they felt cold whenever Kemi or Kola were near. One day, something happened that changed everything. Adani had taken the twins to the market. As they walked through the crowded streets, people stepped aside, giving them a wide berth. Adani tried to ignore the stares, but it was hard. Suddenly, a large cart filled with heavy sacks of grain lost its balance and began to tip over. The people around screamed and ran, but before the cart could crash to the ground, it froze in midair. Everyone turned to look at the twins, who were staring at the cart with an intensity that made even the bravest men tremble. Slowly, the cart settled back onto its wheels, as if nothing had happened. From that day on, the townspeople were convinced that the twins had powers, dark, mysterious powers that they couldn't understand. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the twins could control the weather, others claimed they could read minds. No one wanted to get too close to them, and even their own father, Babajide, began to avoid them. Kemi and Kola didn't understand why everyone was afraid of them. They loved playing together and spent hours exploring the nearby forest, where they felt free from the eyes of the townspeople. But the more they played, the more they noticed that the animals and plants in the forest seemed to react to them in strange ways. Birds would gather around them, chirping loudly as if trying to communicate. Trees would sway gently, even when there was no wind. The twins found it all fascinating, but deep down, they knew something was not right. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, the twins were playing by the river. Kemi suddenly stopped and looked around, her eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Kola. Kola nodded. "It's like someone is crying." They followed the sound, their bare feet splashing through the shallow water. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Finally, they reached a small clearing, where they saw a young girl, no older than them, sitting by the water's edge. She was sobbing, her hands covering her face. "Are you okay?" Kemi asked, her voice soft but firm. The girl looked up, her eyes red and puffy. She shook her head, her sobs choking her words. I lost my brother," she finally managed to say. "He fell into the river, and I can't find him." Without a second thought, Kemi and Kola waded into the water. The river was calm, but it was deep and dark, hiding whatever secrets it held beneath its surface. Kola closed his eyes, concentrating hard. He could feel something, a presence, faint but there. He reached out, his hand plunging into the water. Suddenly, the water began to swirl around them, faster and faster. Kemi grabbed Kola's arm, her heart pounding. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the swirling stopped. In Kola's hand was a small, lifeless body, the girl's brother. The girl screamed and rushed forward, but before she could reach them, Kemi knelt down and placed her hands on the boy's chest. She didn't know why she did it, or what she was supposed to do, but something inside her told her it was the right thing. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, The boy's chest rose and fell with a sudden gasp of air. He coughed, sputtering water, and opened his eyes. The girl stared in shock, tears streaming down her face. You saved him," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kemi and Kola looked at each other, confused but relieved. They had never done anything like this before, and they weren't sure how they had done it now. But the girl didn't care. She hugged her brother tightly, thanking the twins over and over again. But as they walked back to the town, the twins couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They didn't understand what was happening to them, but they knew one thing for sure: their lives would never be the same. Back in Malomo, word of what had happened by the river spread quickly. Some were amazed, others were terrified. The twins had saved a life, but in doing so, they had only deepened the mystery surrounding them. People began to wonder if they should be grateful or even more afraid. Babajide, their father, was one of those who was afraid. He had always loved his children, but now, fear clouded his heart. He couldn't deny the strange things that were happening, and he began to distance himself from Kemi and Kola even more. He spent longer hours away from home, and when he was there, he barely spoke to them. The twins noticed their father's change, and it hurt them deeply. They missed the days when he would play with them, tell them stories, and tuck them into bed at night. But now, it felt like they were losing him, and they didn't know why. One day, Kemi overheard her parents talking in hushed voices. She and Kola had been playing outside, but something drew her back into the house. She stood just outside the door, listening. "I don't know what to do, Adani," Babajide was saying. "The people, they're scared. They think our children are dangerous." Adani's voice was firm, but there was an edge of worry in it. "They're just children, Babajide. Our children. There's nothing to be afraid of." "But what if they're right?" Babajide's voice cracked, filled with fear and doubt. "What if Kemi and Kola really are different? What if they bring bad luck?" Kemi felt a cold knot in her stomach. She didn't want to hear more, so she ran back outside, her heart heavy. She found Kola sitting under a tree, looking up at the sky. "Kola," she said quietly, sitting down beside him. "Do you think we're different? Like, bad different?" Kola looked at her, his eyes serious. "I don't know. But I don't feel bad. Do you?" Kemi shook her head. "No. But everyone else does. Even Baba." They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in their thoughts. They didn't understand why things were the way they were, but they knew they had to stick together. They were twins, after all, and no one could break the bond they shared. As the days turned into weeks, the twins continued to notice more strange things happening around them. Sometimes, when they were angry or upset, the wind would pick up suddenly, or objects would move on their own. At first, it scared them, but gradually, they began to accept it as part of who they were. But the people of Malomo were not so accepting. Fear and suspicion grew, and the twins found themselves more isolated than ever. Children at school whispered about them, and even the teachers seemed uneasy around them. Kemi and Kola tried to ignore it, but it was hard. One evening, as they were walking home from school, they noticed a group of older boys following them. The boys were known for causing trouble, and Kemi's heart began to race. She grabbed Kola's hand and quickened her pace, but the boys caught up to them. "Hey, weirdos!" one of the boys called out, sneering. "Why don't you do one of your freaky magic tricks for us?" Kola glared at the boy but didn't say anything. Kemi squeezed his hand, trying to stay calm. "Leave us alone," Kemi said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. The boys laughed, circling around them. "Or what? You'll put a curse on us?" one of them taunted. Kola couldn't take it anymore. He yanked his hand away from Kemi and faced the boys, his fists clenched. "We don't need to curse you," he said, his voice low and angry. "You're just scared because you don't understand us." The leader of the boys, a tall, lanky kid named Shay, smirked. "Scared? Of you too? Don't make me laugh. You're just a couple of weirdos. No one likes you, not even your own father." That was the last straw. Kemi felt a wave of anger surge through her. She didn't want to be different, she didn't want to be feared, but hearing someone insult her father hurt more than anything. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Suddenly, the air around them grew thick and heavy. The sky, which had been clear moments before, darkened as clouds rolled in. The boys glanced up, their bravado faltering as the wind began to howl. Shay looked around, confusion and fear replacing the smirk on his face. "What's going on?" one of the boys muttered, backing away. Kola reached out to Kemi, his voice soft but urgent. "Kemi, stop. You're scaring them." But Kemi didn't hear him. Her anger was like a fire, burning hot and uncontrollable. The wind whipped around them, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The boys, now genuinely frightened, turned and ran, their shouts of fear echoing in the distance. As they disappeared, the storm subsided as quickly as it had come. The clouds parted, and the wind died down, leaving the street eerily quiet. Kemi stood there, breathing heavily, the anger slowly draining out of her. She looked at Kola, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and concern. "Kemi, what did you do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kemi shook her head, tears filling her eyes. I didn't mean to. I just wanted them to stop." Kola pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping tightly around her. "It's okay, Kemi. It's okay. We'll figure this out together." But deep down, they both knew that things were far from okay. The incident with the boys had shown them just how powerful their emotions were, and how dangerous they could be if not controlled. It was a terrifying realization for two children who just wanted to be normal. When they got home, they didn't tell their parents what had happened. They didn't want to worry them, and they weren't sure how to explain it anyway. But as they lay in bed that night, the memory of the storm and the fear in the boys' eyes played over and over in their minds. The next morning, the twins noticed that their father was unusually quiet. He didn't look at them as he prepared to leave for work, and when their mother asked him if something was wrong, he just shook his head and left without a word. Kemi and Kola exchanged worried glances. They had never seen their father like this before, and it made them uneasy. They didn't know it, but Babajide had heard about the incident with the boys. The rumors had spread quickly, and by the time he reached the marketplace, people were already whispering about how the twins had summoned a storm to scare the boys away. Babajide didn't want to believe it, but the fear in the townspeople's voices was hard to ignore. They were saying that the twins were dangerous, that they were cursed, and that something had to be done before it was too late. Babajide tried to defend his children, but the more he listened, the more doubt crept into his heart. As the days passed, the tension in the town grew. People began avoiding the twins even more than before, crossing the street to avoid walking near them, or pulling their children away when they saw Kemi and Kola approaching. The twins noticed it, and it hurt them deeply, but they didn't know how to make it stop. One evening, as they were sitting outside, watching the sun set behind the hills, Kola turned to Kemi, his expression serious. "We have to do something, Kemi. We can't keep going on like this. People are scared of us." Kemi sighed, resting her chin on her knees. "But what can we do, Kola? We didn't ask to be like this. We didn't ask for any of this." Kola thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe we can find out why we're different. Maybe if we understand it, we can learn to control it, and people won't be so afraid." Kemi looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you really think that's possible?" Kola nodded. "We have to try, Kemi. We can't let this keep happening. We have to figure out who we are." And so, the twins made a pact. They would find out the truth about their strange abilities, no matter what it took. They didn't know where to start, but they knew they had each other, and that was enough. The next day, they decided to talk to Mama Rissi, the old midwife who had delivered them. She was known for her wisdom and knowledge of the old ways, and the twins hoped she might have some answers. They walked to her small hut on the edge of town, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. When they arrived, Mama Rissi was sitting outside, weaving a basket. She looked up as they approached, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "What brings you here, my children?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Kemi and Kola hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Finally, Kola spoke up. "Mama Rissi, we need your help. We think there's something wrong with us." Mama Rissi put down her basket and motioned for them to sit. "Tell me what's troubling you." Kemi took a deep breath and began to explain everything, the strange things that had been happening, the fear in the townspeople's eyes, and the storm they had accidentally summoned. As she spoke, Mama Rissy listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Kemi finished, Mama Rissy was silent for a long time, her gaze distant as if she was remembering something from long ago. Finally, she looked at the twins, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "My dear children," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "You are not cursed, nor are you dangerous. But you are different, and that difference is something that the people of this town do not understand. Fear comes from ignorance, and unfortunately, ignorance is powerful." Kemi and Kola exchanged glances, their hearts sinking. "But why are we different?" Kemi asked, her voice trembling. "Why can we do these things?" Mama Rissy sighed and stood up, motioning for them to follow her inside her hut. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and incense as they entered, and the dim light from the single window cast long shadows on the walls. Mama Rissy walked over to a shelf lined with old, dusty books and pulled one down, her hands trembling slightly. She opened the book and began to flip through the pages until she found what she was looking for. "This is an ancient text," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "It speaks of a time long ago when there were people born with special gifts, gifts that could change the world for better or worse. These people were known as the Children of the Wind." Kola frowned. "Children of the Wind?" Mama Rissy nodded. "Yes. They were said to be born during powerful storms, just like the one on the night you were born. They had abilities that could influence the elements, control nature, and even heal the sick. But their gifts came with great responsibility, and many of them struggled to control their powers." Kemi's eyes widened. "Are you saying, we're children of the wind?" Mama Rissy closed the book and placed a hand on Kemi's shoulder. "I believe you are, my dear. And that is why you must learn to understand your powers, to control them. If you do not, they will control you, and the consequences could be dire." Kemi and Kola sat in stunned silence, the weight of Mama Rissy's words sinking in. They had always known they were different, but they had never imagined it could be something like this. The idea of being children of the wind was both thrilling and terrifying, and they didn't know what to make of it. "But how do we learn to control our powers?" Kola asked, his voice filled with determination. "We don't want to hurt anyone." Mama Rissy smiled gently. "The first step is to accept who you are. You must not be afraid of your gifts, but you must also respect them. You are still children, and you have much to learn. But I will help you, as will your mother and father. You are not alone in this." Kemi and Kola felt a wave of relief wash over them. For the first time in a long while, they felt hopeful. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way. They would learn to control their powers, to use them for good, and to prove to the people of Malomo that they were not something to be feared. As they left Mama Rissy's hut, the twins felt a newfound sense of purpose. They had taken the first step on a journey that would change their lives forever. And though they didn't know what the future held, they were determined to face it together. The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly as they walked home, but a sense of foreboding lingered in their hearts. They knew that learning to control their powers would not be easy, and the fear and suspicion of the townspeople would not disappear overnight. But they also knew that they could no longer hide who they were. That night, as they sat with their mother in the dimly lit kitchen, Kola and Kemi decided to tell her everything. Mama Rissy had urged them to share their burden with their parents, and now, sitting at the table with a cup of steaming tea, they realized how important it was. "Mommy," Kemi began, her voice hesitant, "there's something we need to tell you." Their mother, Ayo, looked up from her knitting, concern etched on her face. "What is it, my children? You know you can tell me anything." Kola took a deep breath and explained what had happened with the boys, how the storm had come out of nowhere, and how they had gone to see Mama Rissy. He told her everything, from the rumors in town to what Mama Rissy had said about them being children of the wind. Ayo listened quietly, her knitting forgotten, as her children spoke. When they finished, she was silent for a long time, her eyes distant as she processed what they had told her. Finally, she sighed and reached out to take their hands in hers. "I always knew there was something special about you too," she said softly. "The night you were born, the storm was unlike any other. But I never imagined it would be something like this." Kemi's eyes filled with tears. "Mommy, we don't want to be different. We just want to be normal." Ayo squeezed their hands gently. "I know, my love. But you must remember, being different is not a bad thing. It's what makes you who you are. You have a gift, and it's up to you to decide how you use it. You can't change who you are, but you can choose how you live." Kola nodded, determination in his eyes. "We want to learn, Mommy. We don't want to be afraid anymore. Can you help us?" Ayo smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Of course, I will help you. Your father and I will do everything we can to support you. But you must promise me something." Kemi and Kola looked at her, their hearts pounding. "What is it, Mommy?" Ayo's expression grew serious. "You must promise me that you will never use your powers in anger. No matter what happens, no matter how much someone hurts you or makes you afraid, you must control your emotions. Anger can be dangerous, and if you lose control, it could hurt not just others, but also yourselves." The twins nodded solemnly. "We promise, Mommy. We'll be careful." Ayo pulled them into a tight hug, holding them close as if she could protect them from all the dangers of the world. "You are my precious children," she whispered, "and I love you more than anything. We will get through this together, as a family." Over the next few days, life in Malomo continued as usual, but for Kemi and Kola, everything had changed. They spent their mornings helping their mother with chores and their afternoons learning how to control their powers with Mama Rissi's guidance. It was hard work, and there were many times when they felt frustrated and overwhelmed, but they kept pushing forward, determined to learn. Mama Rissi taught them how to focus their energy, how to calm their minds, and how to channel their emotions in a positive way. She showed them how to use their powers to help others, like calming a frightened animal or healing a sick plant. The twins discovered that their abilities could be a force for good, and this gave them a sense of purpose. However, despite their efforts, the townspeople's fear did not lessen. The rumors about the twins continued to spread, and soon, it reached the ears of the town's elders. The elders were a group of wise men and women who governed Malomo, and they took the concerns of the people seriously. One evening, as the twins were returning home from Mama Rissi's hut, they saw a group of men gathered outside their house. Among them were the elders, their faces stern and serious. Kemi and Kola exchanged worried glances, their hearts racing with fear. When they reached the house, one of the elders, a tall man with graying hair named Chief Ade, stepped forward. "Kemi, Kola," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "we need to speak with your parents. Please go inside." The twins hesitated, but Ayo appeared at the door, her expression calm and composed. "It's all right, my children," she said gently. "Go inside. Your father and I will handle this." Reluctantly, Kemi and Kola obeyed, but they couldn't help but linger by the window, peering through the curtains as the conversation unfolded outside. "We've heard troubling things about your children," Chief Ade began, addressing Babajide and Ayo. "The people of Malomo are afraid. They believe the twins have powers that could bring harm to our community." Babajide, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice filled with emotion. "My children are not a threat, Chief Ade. They are good children, and they are learning to control their gifts. We are doing everything we can to ensure they use their abilities for good." Chief Ade frowned. "We understand your position, Babajide, but the people's fear is real. They are demanding that something be done to ensure the safety of our town. We are asking you to consider sending the twins away, to a place where they can learn to control their powers without causing fear among the people." Kemi and Kola's hearts sank as they heard these words. The idea of being sent away from their family and the only home they had ever known filled them with dread. Ayo's voice trembled as she responded, "You can't ask us to send our children away. They are our family. We love them, and we will not abandon them." Chief Ade's expression softened slightly. "We understand that this is difficult, Ayo. But please consider what is best for the children and the community. We are not demanding that you send them away, but we urge you to think about it." With that, the elders turned and left, leaving Babajide and Ayo standing in stunned silence. Kemi and Kola backed away from the window, their minds racing. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. The thought of being sent away from their family, from each other, was unbearable. When their parents came inside, they found the twins sitting on the floor, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Babajide knelt down beside them, his heart aching at the sight of his children in such distress. "We heard everything," Kemi whispered, her voice choked with tears. "They want to send us away, don't they?" Ayo knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around the twins. "We won't let that happen," she said firmly. "You are our children, and you belong here with us. No one is going to take you away." But despite their parents' reassurances, a seed of doubt had been planted in Kemi and Kola's hearts. What if the townspeople's fear became too much to bear? What if they were forced to leave their home, their family, and each other behind? That night, as they lay in bed, the twins made another pact. If it ever came to that, if they were ever forced to leave Malomo, they would run away together. They would never be separated, no matter what. The days turned into weeks, and although the situation in Malomo remained tense, the twins continued to learn and grow. They practiced their powers diligently, honing their abilities with Mama Risi's guidance. And slowly, they began to feel more confident, more in control. But just as they started to believe that things might finally get better, a new threat emerged, one that would test their strength, their resolve, and their bond as siblings like never before. The rains came early that year, and with them, a sickness spread through the town. It started with a few people falling ill, but soon it became an epidemic. The townspeople were terrified, and they began to whisper that the sickness was a curse brought upon them by the twins. The twins knew it wasn't true, but the accusations hurt deeply. People began to avoid them even more, and some even threw stones at their house, shouting curses and blaming them for the sickness. It was a dark and frightening time, and the twins felt more isolated than ever. Mama Risi, who had always been kind and supportive, grew worried. She knew the sickness was not the twins' doing, but she also knew that fear could drive people to do terrible things. She warned the twins to be careful, to stay out of sight as much as possible, and to never use their powers in front of others. One evening, as the rain poured down and the wind howled outside, there was a loud knock on the door. Babajide opened it to find a group of men standing outside, their faces grim and determined. "We've come to take the twins," one of the men said, his voice cold and unyielding. "The elders have decided that they must leave Malomo. They are a danger to us all, and we cannot allow them to stay." Ayo stood protectively in front of her children, her heart pounding with fear. "You can't take them," Ayo said firmly, her voice trembling with emotion. "They are our children. They've done nothing wrong." The man's expression remained hard as stone. "It's not about right or wrong, Ayo. It's about keeping our town safe. The people believe the twins are the cause of this sickness, and they demand action. If you won't let them go peacefully, we will have to take them by force." Kemi and Kola, who had been listening from behind the door, felt their hearts racing with fear. They couldn't believe this was happening. They had always known that the townspeople feared them, but they never thought it would come to this. Babajide stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "If you want to take my children, you'll have to go through me first." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but their leader remained resolute. "We don't want violence, Babajide. But the elders have made their decision. If you resist, it will only make things worse." As the tension in the room reached its peak, Kemi suddenly spoke up, her voice shaky but determined. "Wait." She stepped out from behind the door, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "We'll go with you, but on one condition." The leader raised an eyebrow, surprised by the girl's courage. "And what is that?" Kemi took a deep breath, glancing at her brother before continuing. "You have to let us try to heal the sick. If we can prove that we're not the cause of this sickness, then you have to let us stay." Kola's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected his sister to say that, but as he looked into her determined eyes, he knew she was right. They couldn't run away from this. They had to face it. The leader of the group hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. "You think you can heal the sick? How?" Kemi swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on her. "We don't know for sure, but we have to try. Mama Risi taught us that our powers can be used to help others. If there's even a chance that we can save lives, don't you think it's worth it?" There was a long silence as the men considered her words. Finally, the leader nodded slowly. "All right. We'll give you a chance. But if you fail, you'll have to leave Malomo for good." Ayo and Babajide looked at their children, their hearts filled with both fear and pride. They knew this was a dangerous gamble, but they also knew it was the only way to protect their family. The next morning, Kemi and Kola were led to the village square, where the sick had been gathered. The air was thick with tension as the townspeople watched, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Kemi and Kola exchanged a nervous glance before stepping forward. They had practiced their powers with Mama Risi, but they had never tried to use them in this way before. They weren't even sure if it would work, but they knew they had to try. The first person they approached was an old woman, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Kemi knelt beside her, gently placing her hand on the woman's forehead. Kola did the same, focusing all his energy on calming the storm within him. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd watched in tense silence, and Kemi could feel their doubt pressing down on her like a heavy weight. But then, slowly, the old woman's breathing began to ease. Her color returned, and her eyes fluttered open. She's waking up," someone in the crowd exclaimed. A murmur of surprise and disbelief spread through the square as the old woman slowly sat up, looking around in confusion. What happened? Kemi and Kola exchanged a relieved smile, their hearts pounding with excitement. They had done it. They had healed her. But there were many more people still suffering, and the twins knew their work was far from over. One by one, they moved through the crowd, using their powers to heal the sick. With each person they helped, the tension in the air slowly began to lift. The townspeople, who had once feared the twins, now watched in awe as they performed what seemed like miracles. By the time they finished, the sun was high in the sky, and the square was filled with people who had been brought back from the brink of death. The leader of the group who had come to take the twins stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Chief Ade, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Kemi, Kola," he began, his voice slow and thoughtful, "you have done something truly remarkable today. You have shown us that your powers can be used for good, not harm." Kemi and Kola looked at each other, their hearts filled with hope. Could it be that the tide was finally turning? That they might be accepted for who they were? Chief Ade continued, "The elders will need to discuss what has happened here today, but for now, you may return home. You have earned that right." The twins' parents rushed forward, pulling their children into a tight embrace. Tears of relief streamed down Ayo's face as she held them close. "You were so brave," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you both." As the crowd began to disperse, the twins felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things would be different now. Maybe they would finally be accepted by the people of Malomo. But deep down, they knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. For while they had proven that their powers could be used for good, the fear and suspicion in the hearts of the townspeople would not disappear overnight. They still had a long way to go before they could truly be free from the shadows that had followed them since birth. And as they walked home with their parents, they couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting for them, something even more dangerous than the sickness that had plagued their town. But whatever it was, they would face it together. They were no longer just two frightened children hiding from the world. They were Kemi and Kola, the children of the wind, and they were ready to embrace their destiny, no matter where it might lead. Night fell over Malomo, and the village was quiet, but the twins lay awake, their minds racing with everything that had happened. They had come so far, but they knew their journey was far from over. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a new danger was stirring, one that would test their bond, their courage, and their very will to survive. But whatever the future held, they would face it together. For no matter what came next, they knew one thing for certain: they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. And no matter how dark the night might become, they would find their way back to the light. Together.